Hey, hey, hey.
Hello, hello.
So excited to have you here today. This is going to be an incredible episode. If you guys have never met Megan DiMartino, well, you're about to, obviously, because she's here with us, but also we're going to dive deep into who she is based on whose she is. And Megan and I are newfound friends as of 2021. Thank you, Clubhouse. Thank you to the Embrace Your Ambition conference in Denver, Colorado earlier this year. And now, most recently, the Breakfast with Champions event, the consortium, I can't say it. What is it?
Consortium.
Whatever it was that we just went to, that was magical. We got an extra layer into our relationship. And so I'm excited for people to have a peek into that and a peek into your heart that is so pure and has driven me into a place of peace every time we're together. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Tamra. Honestly, just a joy. I was looking so forward to this and carried a few pieces of equipment because, as you shared, we were in New York City this past weekend, and now I'm in New Jersey. So
I didn't realize you were in New Jersey. Okay. And then I read on your bio too that you are actually a New York girl living in Texas. So I didn't know you had New York roots. That makes total sense with your fashionable ways.
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island. And, like you just said, my father and mother were very entrepreneurial and very creative and visionary people in their own arenas. And my dad loved going into Manhattan. We grew up born and grew up on Long Island, but not that far out, meaning Long Island, as you experienced the other evening, is long. And so we lived closer to the city. And so we would pop into the city a lot of Sundays after church and just mosey around, and just explore, because he was a young man, didn't have a lot of money, but that DNA is in my spirit. Absolutely. Yes.
Well, it shows in everything you do, and it makes total sense to me now that I know that. But it's amazing that entrepreneurial piece that also essentially shed into who you are, based on the example of your father or your mom as well. Or
my mother was my father was much more overt in his entrepreneurial dynamic, but my mother was a wonderful seamstress. And so as life went on, I went to Catholic school. So of course I wore a uniform, but as I grew up, prom dresses and even my wedding dress, but prom dresses, we would create together. And so she had the ability to take a pattern and break it up and get a pattern of a sleeve, let's say, and then a bodice of another pattern. And, yes. And so we designed together. And I thought I was going to be a dress designer. I thought that is what I was going to do. Yes.
That's amazing. How long did you guys do that together? Like all the way through your wedding, you're saying, even after?
Through my first wedding, first marriage. Yes. That wedding dress was she and I designed together. Yeah.
That's pretty magnificent. So tell us about the transition of how all of those endeavors have led into your, and I say success, right? And we talk about this often here, is that success is a figment of our imagination, and it's also to be understood in every different context to who we are. And everyone's idea and definition is different. But from a business and an entrepreneurial perspective, knowing that you've sustained and scaled 2 7-figure businesses in the skincare industry, I mean, it's pretty miraculous. And when I first got to know you, I was really blown away by, one, the fact that you're still after it, y'all. She's like going strong and it's amazing, but you're so passionate about it, and not just what you do, but what other people do and how you can help them. So I want to hear about that part of who you are.
Well, basically, I have to go back a tad to my dad, honestly, because my grandfather, DiMartino, came to the United States from Italy at 16. He was a twin and lived in a little town in Italy, and his mother didn't have enough milk for the 2 babies. So he was wet nursed by, as they called it, by another woman who had lost her child. So he became very close with that family. And so when they were coming to America, it wasn't that he didn't have a relationship with his own family, but he was also close with them. And so he really saw it as an opportunity more than just coming with them. So when he came, to the United States. Of course, he came to New York. And where Madison Square Garden is, Tamra, was a very fancy hotel back in the day. And he became what they called a tin cup boy. So creating the foam, for doing a straight razor and the shaving cream.
Whoa.
And so he passed when I was young, so I don't remember him. But story goes that he loved ladies and loved doing the Ziegfeld girls, and so they would come to Alberto DiMartino. And so a very wealthy guy from Long Island who was let's say working on Wall Street, loved him and said, "I'm going to bring you out so I have my private barber." And he set my grandfather up in business. And so my dad saw his father doing not only the barbering piece, but the hair salon piece, which was in the back of the barbershop. And so after the Second World War, when my father was in the Air Force, he got a job with a large paper company and was selling many products, but one was wet strength tissue for underbedding for hospitals. So Ray DiMartino, I bet this would work for perming, because he saw his father doing perms, with that like rocket ship and cloth. And so he cut it up, Tamra, and brought it to salons in the New York City area and said, "Try this." And of course, by this point, they were not using cloth. They were using a non-woven material called mesh. But it was very expensive, and these people were reusing them, so very unsanitary. So he brought this tissue to them and said, "Try this." And of course, it worked, and it was very inexpensive, and it was disposable. So us kids were packing end papers in our basement, Tamra. I was like 5.
That is so cool, though. I mean, what a crazy story. And this is where I think so many people get stuck in entrepreneurship. Because I think it has to be this like magnificent understanding, or that you have to have all the fine details understood, or you need to write a business plan, or you need to go to a bank and get a loan. Like, it's actually not that hard.
No, it's your heart. It's your mind, your spirit, and that passion. He knew, Ray was, as my mother said, many years later, and by the way, all of my grandparents were immigrants. So my grandmother, Irish, Ireland, her dad, and then Germany, her mom. So there is that spirit as well with them. And as my mother said years later, "Ray, she's more like you than any of our kids," because I was the middle child of 4. And so when I was starting my first business in 1992, my dad called me and said, "I know you won't listen to me, but it's very hard what you're about to do. It's very hard, but I know you're going to do it. So just know that I'm here." And so, meaning from not financially. At first, he did not, invest any capital into the business, because the years later, he told me, "You have to see it for yourself if you could do it." Now, mind you, my friend, this was 1992. And so I fast forward over many things, but I will share back that Ray started manufacturing end wraps. I must probably tie this together. So he went to the guy that was one of the board members of this very large paper company and said, "Would you have any interest in joining me? I'm leaving and starting my own business." And this man did. And this gentleman and my father put together a business. And so he was older than my father, but he was very generous with my father to enable him to almost have it within that larger company. But it gave my father the opportunity to establish his business and grow it.
Goodness.
And so in 1982, my father kept calling me and saying, "Need you to come and join us, because I want to add some products to the beauty division." Because in the 70s, he developed dental and medical laboratory products. They're still in business. My father's no longer with us, but my brother Michael runs this business, and dental and medical laboratory. So if you've ever had a X-ray, that bite wing tab, Rayson manufactures that for Darby Dental.
Wow.
And
That went from something like a perm, which is now outdated. I always wanted a perm so bad because I have straight hair. So I always wanted curly hair. But to know that this is the evolution of entrepreneurship once you get to that place of unlock, and that belief, I think, is such a huge part for that person who was essentially a stranger, maybe a colleague or a coworker, to have that belief in him and then to help him in that and support. I mean, I think there's so many conversations happening in this one conversation. This is such a cool story.
Exactly. But now, in reference to myself, remember, I had a dream of being a dress designer, a clothing designer, fashion designer. That's what it would be called. But this is too, like you said, the story is too long. But the bottom line is that a decision I made, and it's based on love, and a decision was based on love and the right reasons, but it was also based on fear, so to speak, because in the late 60s, when I was in college, the world was very polarized like it is today. And I was in college in DC, and the cool, fun thing to do was to march. And it was not comfortable for me. It just was not. I didn't know what pot was. I mean, the whole scene was not comfortable. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go to F.I.T, where I really wanted to go to school in the beginning, but my parents wanted me to go to a Catholic girls' college. So I went to Marymount in Arlington, Virginia. But my folks had moved into Manhattan by this point. And so I talked them into that. And then I meaning to go to F.I.T and work, though. And so I got a job at Lord & Taylor in a buyer's training program. And then, as I said, I did not have my North Star, truly. My younger brother was in college. I was in college, where I grew up, we had moved from that home. So it's not that they weren't interested in me, but they were on to a new period of their life. And so I felt lost. So I married my boyfriend.
Yep.
And I started throwing up on the 803. I was commuting to Manhattan to work with Mrs. Peppard in Lord & Taylor and go to F.I.T. I had this really great plan put together, Tamra, but life happened. And so I do not regret that, but it took me off course. And that is what my little book is about, these earlier years, and about hope and possibilities, because I never lost sight of my dream of creating. Obviously I was not going to be a fashion designer, but I knew that I could not breathe. And this is what my mother was saying years later, that Ray, she's more like you than any of our children, because and this is what you see in me today, Tamra, is that if I was not creating, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't live. And so, so the story is long and the twists and turns. But in 1982, after I divorced my first husband, and again, that's a whole other story, and it is in my little book, but I was working in Manhattan, and I had two small children, and I was working in sales and advertising and loving it, but it was not the right thing to do with two small children, commuting to Manhattan.
That's hard.
Parent. It was not.
Did you have that sense of mom guilt that everybody talks about, do you feel?
Remember what I stood up and said on
it's age, it's no age, right? It's so hard.
It is very, very hard. So at that same time, my dad was calling me because he was my dad, I'm sure, but also he wanted to add some products to the beauty division, which were private label NRAPs. And so and private label meant the distributor in the area, like Sally Beauty, which everyone knows.
Correct.
But if they bought 10 cases, it had an imprint on it of the distributor. But he wanted to add some products to the beauty division. And I really did not want to move. Now they're past where we were the other night. Okay. So way out east, way. I really didn't want to live out there, but on the other side of the coin, I recognized by this point, now I had a fair amount of experience. And I recognized that if I was going to create something on my own, I needed the piece that he would offer me, which was market research, going into the market, seeing what the market needed, sourcing the material, putting it together, packaging, marketing, and then taking it to market. And I was able, you would never get that experience in a large corporation. Never.
No, not firsthand like that. And
Never.
I think the connections in that is also so important, because then you can really do that market research in a whole nother level, because it's people in the granular experience versus just the consumer.
Exactly.
It's really amazing.
Yes, it was a truly amazing opportunity and time. And when I say time, it was in the early 80s. And that's when and I'm sure you've heard Tim Story speak about Vidal Sassoon, and doing some education with the Paul Mitchell schools. Well, that whole genre, meaning Aveda, products, Horst, Sassoon, and Paul Mitchell and so forth, were evolving. The whole industry was beginning to evolve. And so I was in the middle of that. And so when I did what my dad did, walking in with his tissue there, I would go to salons and say, what do you need? But it had to be paper. And so in reference to paper, because they're a paper converter. And I'll explain in a minute what that really means. But the acrylic world, acrylic nails were just happening. Just beginning. Asian thing hadn't happened yet. This is a whole history.
This is amazing, you guys.
It really is. And someday I am going to write this, because there is a timeline. People really need to understand this for so many, because it does have that application back to what we're speaking about, business and entrepreneurship. But what they said to me was, they're ruining our towels. And what they meant by that is powder and acrylic nails. All those companies, Creative Nail to OPI, started from the dental industry. All of them.
That's
Some fashion, because of bonding teeth.
Okay. So they just put it on.
That is how it started. And so they were clever enough or wise enough to know that because there was no such thing as a nail tech. It was just a cosmetologist that did it all, so to speak. They would do a manicure, a pedicure maybe, but there was no such thing as a nail tech. Even from a licensing position in the United States, the entire United States, there was no separate nail licensing. So these companies like Dr. Nordstrom from Creative Nail was wise enough, clever enough to then go into these distributors and start educating the cosmetologist how to do these cool acrylic nails. Okay. So then Megan walks in and said, what do you need in reference to paper? And they said, well, they're ruining our terry towel, our waffle cotton towel, because that stuff hardens and destroys the towel. So my father's genius over the years became, and that's what you were referring to earlier, was sourcing of material. So when I went to my dad, I said, okay, Dad, or Ray, as we called him, and I shared, different salons sharing these anecdotal stories. And so he started sourcing non-woven material, because I asked them, what does it need to be like? And they said, it needs to be absorbent and lint-free. Lint-free was a biggie, because of the
fibers. Yeah, get all over your nails. Yeah, it'd be terrible. Yeah.
That's right. So Ray did the sourcing, and we put together the original, and I say original because Kimberly Clark knocked us off, and others, they did. I was called the towel lady. They didn't have any idea I was Ray's daughter, but I'm out there like what you see now, and I said, Dad, we need to do a sample program because I started going to the distributor trade shows, because they had manufacturers reps, and I told these guys I needed to come. Okay, whatever. I mean, they thought I was crazy, but the only reason that they paid any attention, I'm talking about the reps, was because they made a lot of money from the end reps, because the 80s perming was big.
That is so insane. So it now's transitioned into this nail place, but I know that you have the skincare line. So when did that side?
So what happened, Tamra, and this is a really interesting piece to this story for all of us, girls and the like, of spa. Well, spa didn't exist at all. There was no such thing, zero, unless you went to a destination type of location. So what we know today did not exist. So, but the nail thing had to happen before spa happened. So somewhere in the mid 80s to the latter 80s, natural nails started to come in, and that was the forerunner to spa. It really was, because aromatherapy, there were different things about it. Waxing didn't exist. Gigi honey, it came in from Canada. The gal that invented, Anna, I could go on and on. And so you could see this. And so by the late 80s, salons started calling themselves full service salons. And that meant didn't call themselves a spa yet, because they really weren't doing skincare. But then what happened was that in 1985, 6-ish, I started brewing this idea that I needed to add skincare. And because back, and I'll share this one little piece, in 1973, I was working in Bloomingdale's in Stamford, Connecticut. That by this point, we, as a family, were living in Connecticut. And I went to Bloomingdale's to apply for a job. And with my background, they said, well, you need something more than this, and like a Christmas job, so to speak. And they were bringing in a line called Biba, which was featured in the movie of Freddie Mercury, Queen, and his girlfriend Mary worked at Biba. She was a major store in London, Carnaby Street, from the Beatles to, Mick Jagger and so forth. And so she cut a deal with Bloomies and brought it in. But the revolutionary thing was that they positioned it in the junior department. So now that's very common to have, cosmetics or certainly, accessory type products in, the junior department, not on the main floor, not in the, traditional skincare cosmetics. So I was young, and they said, they wanted me to work with this Biba, so I was trained by the makeup artist from Biba. So that's a very important piece to me, because during that period, and I remember it like it was yesterday, it was a Saturday, and Don McLean's Bye Bye American Pie was playing. Drove the Chevy to the levee, and the levee went dry.
I do know that one.
And that was playing, and I had this Holy Spirit moment saying, someday you're going to do this. Now, do this, what does that mean? But God doesn't answer those questions, but it was here for all those years. So now fast forward to the late 80s, and paper, okay, I was creative and, working with my dad, but I knew there was more. And so in that period of time, the late 80s, I was offered to interview for a job with Alcon Laboratories, which is in Fort Worth, Texas. And that's what brought me to Texas.
Okay.
So Alcon is owned by Nestle, meaning it's an international multi-billion-dollar corporation. And they manufacture products ostensibly for the ophthalmologist. If you wear contacts, Alcon contacts a solution, but the dermatologist as well. And they had just bought a small lab of hair care products, very, medicinal, NDC coated, and they wanted to repackage, reposition, and bring new products into it. And so hence the gentleman that was running that division approached me saying, would you like to, he had gotten to know me and knew what I had done with all of these products that I, transformed this raisin and paper company. And so I knew that it was time. My older daughter was going to be a senior in high school. She could finish. And they're 5 years apart, my daughters, and the younger gal, that's what I was saying the other day. They're like, oh my God, this poor woman is dragging us around the world. But she was 11, so it was a good time to move. So they flew me to Fort Worth, Texas, interviewed, offered the job, And we packed up the wagon train and moved to Fort Worth, Texas in 1987. But I technically took that job because I knew I could hang out with very sophisticated chemists. Because, Tamra, there was no Mr. Google. There was no internet. There was nothing. And the products that I didn't even know what I wanted to develop, but I'm smack dab in the middle of the baby boomer generation, and I knew what I was looking for, and it wasn't out there. It wasn't. The only product that had any result-oriented activity, as we call it, was night repair from Estee Lauder, which is still on the market.
Yeah.
But there was nothing. And so I knew that I could pick their brain and get to know. And I was also ready for an adventure. And so we moved that summer. So I worked with them from we moved in the end of 87 school time. And then I was with them until about 90. And basically didn't necessarily, Don McLean time didn't say I had to have my own business. It was just I was going to create something, right? So we were working on a hair product line based on hyaluronic acid. I'm sure you have heard of hyaluronic acid because it's a tour de force today, but this is in the late 80s. And the only reason Alcon was working in that is because it initially was for eye surgery because it's a very large molecule. So therefore that science was there. And my boss, the gentleman that I worked with, was discussing different ingredients with the chemists. And so we put this line together called Hyaluron. So what does Megan do? I'm working on it, designing it, but I did a whole storyboard on a skincare portion of it. And I brought it to my boss. I was so excited. I presented this and he looked at me and he said, skincare doesn't sell.
Oh, yeah. And it's now it's billions and billions of dollar industry. That's so crazy.
But this is before spa happened, before aesthetics. Now the nail had, but then he cited, Redken had tried and this one had tried. But the baby boomer hadn't gotten old enough yet. But as important as that, the science hadn't happened yet, you see. So I didn't quit my job. I had a child in college, but I said, this is not going to work forever. So I knew that I was not going to stay there, but another year plus, 2 years almost. But I started doing my, not exit strategy as much as, really looking into the market. And the other advantage I had being inside that publicly traded, very large international company is I was privy to, because there was no Google, no websites, I was privy to internal marketing, international information. And I read in 90, that Avon was going to launch a single product. And this is 90, and they were going to launch in the spring of 92, this product called Anew, based on glycolic acid. And my marketing brain said, this glycolic acid must be something, because if you think about Avon, it's the Avon lady in that catalog. Other than Skin So Soft, which is a bug repellent, they didn't market any name, right?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
Yes. So I went to the head chemist, brought him a beer after hours, and I said, Raymond, tell me about glycolic acid. Really, Raymond Bollinger. And wonderful guy, very serious. But he was used to me. Yeah. I had to bring the beer for sure. And he, what he said, Tamra, he goes, well, he started talking about alpha chains and beta chains. And I'm like, no. You're talking to me. And he went, oh, okay. And then he said, well, I remember going, well, I guess exfoliation. Oh, okay. But still, there was no information out there. But to make a long story short, I started calling labs around the United States and found a lab that was going into R&D of glycolin.
Just in 1990 timeframe. That seems insane.
Exactly. So everything that you see and know is from then. Correct. Yes. Yes.
It's so fast. It brings like a whole I literally didn't know any of this. It brings a whole new perspective of one time. And we talk about time all the time in correlation to God's perspective of time, 1 year, 1,000 years, one day, and understanding that. And then realizing that if we activate today, what could become, right? Like in that becoming process, how beautiful it is. And we feel like it's so slow and painful in the timing, but you just have to start somewhere. And you were literally like flipping over every rock that you could, which is really powerful and clearly an entrepreneurial trait that most people end up lacking. And that's why most entrepreneurs don't succeed. But here you are still moving. That's so incredible. So you're looking for R&D.
And I found a company that was working in it. But I do want to segue to what you just said about the Lord. And I moved to Texas, I said, in '87. And every person that I had, a relationship with, my secretary to my stylist, was talking about this Jesus. Now, as a Catholic, and I'm not criticizing Catholics, but it's not a relationship. And of course, I went to Catholic school all my life, except for junior high. And so I didn't have that understanding of Jesus. And so one day I said to my secretary, Debbie, who was moving, I said, let's have dinner. And I asked her, I said, who is this Jesus to you? And she shared her journey, Tamra. And then God used, and this is, to me, is the key to me right here, is that God uses everyone. And so after that, I had a friend, his name was Jim Miller, and he was not a boyfriend, but he was a friend, and we used to walk all the time. And he was an ex-Vice Dallas cop who was in the garage when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Whoa. Now, by this point, he's in the oil and gas industry, but we were buddies. And one day, I was at his office, and we were about to go for a walk, and he was flipping channels, and he had this TV evangelist guy on. And I stood there, and I was listening, and I said, that's a good word, or something like that. He goes, oh, do you want, now this is God, do you want to go to church someday? He's here in Dallas. Well, sure. And I did, and wow, I just was knocked over. So then that was a church called Church on the Rock, Larry Lee, and there was a Church on the Rock in Fort Worth, and Jeff Wickwire. And so one Wednesday night by myself, I walked into that church, and for maybe 2 months, every time there was an altar call, I was down at the altar.
I know that feeling all too well.
And one day, Tamra, this woman, these big, long, dangly earrings, and this heavy Texas accent said to me, honey, I don't know what you did, but it doesn't really matter. God, you're forgiven. And I said to her, it can't be that easy. It can't be that easy. Because it is. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. And so the essence is that God will move mountains I look at the Trinity as a boardroom. Okay, what are we going to do with this one? She's got a heart for us, but so we'll move her down the Bible Belt, And so basically I am so open to pay attention, to listen to people and their hearts, because it's really what God wants us to be, that vessel, that light to help others see.
And you really are. I mean, it's amazing to witness you when you're with people. I mean, you guys at this conference, I would see her sitting at this one table, and by the time there was like a gap, she would be up and beeline herself to people. And you were like that woman who came over, and regardless of what came out of your mouth, you just have this sense of peace and almost like an all-knowing that we just lean on so much. So I see it in action. And so that deposit, the Holy Spirit is surely within you. It's really amazing.
And that has sustained me, Tamra. And coming from you, I truly, appreciate the endorsement, the acknowledgement, because I am human, But then back to Raymond Bollinger there, and the R&D then. And so I found this lab and put together my first brand, Glycolique. And I left my job, and my boss was not happy. But I said to him, John, I'm doing this for me, not to you. And he got that. He did. And because he had left a big corporate job to kind of spearhead this thing. So he did understand it. And so years later, by the way, remember, this is the man that said skincare didn't sell. Maybe 4 or 5 years later, he called me and said, do you want to do something with me? I said, I don't think so.
You missed the train. You
missed the train. So I started Glycolique, but I was very undercapitalized. And as you've heard, like Amelia speak about this, now she's much younger than I, but a little later in time. But banks would not loan me money, even though it was doing well. I mean, I was a woman. It just, I didn't have a wealthy husband. I didn't have deep collateral. I mean, there was no way. And so I built it to over 7-figure, I did. And, but the lab that manufactured it from the very beginning asked if I wanted to sell it to them. They did, because they had tried to get into this wholesale beauty industry. Very small industry at that time, very networked. That's what, Tim Story basically is speaking about, really. And but they failed miserably. But I had worked for 2 companies, right? I had worked for my family's company and then Alcon, this other division of theirs. And so I knew the players. And so I was able to, Glycolique was able to be introduced. And the distributors, the purchasing agents or the buyers would say, I don't know, Megan, but you know what you're doing, so we'll give you a shot. But I marketed it in a small system, very similar to what you tried. It was even smaller though. It was a 3-step system, because I knew that the salesman, because it was mostly men, who were going into the salon, because spa hadn't happened, we're going to then speak to the stylist and sell it to them. So it had to be simple, but packed a powerful punch. And that has been my philosophy. I mean, yes, it's a much larger line, Novitov, then Glycolique, but I ended up selling it to them in late 95, because I felt that if and I ran it contractually for them for about almost 2 years. But if I then had the proper funding, I could start again. Because it was such a struggle, factoring every order and oh my God. So really.
I could only imagine. And I think there's a component to that. And I've yet to read Sharon Lecter's Exit Rich book. And I'm excited to do so. But I think it's interesting to think of it from that perspective. It was not about like a get rich quick scheme, but more so, how can I do this better? And knowing that your dream was just getting started really in that realm, that you were willing to let go of the baby in order to have the toddler, right? And I think there's just a lot to that I don't think people really process often. They just think that you're getting out, but you're like, I'm getting in. I'm actually about to play ball.
Exactly. 100%. You analyzed that very clearly. And that book, by the way, Exit Rich, I mean, Sharon is one of my, she's a friend, but she is a mentor, and I just really love and admire her. But that book, everyone should have that if they're in business, because it gives you, I mean, it's a true, I mean, it'll end up, I know Sharon well enough, it'll be a course, and a deep course, because there's so much to it, even running your own family.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, it really has such depth and facets to it that everyone on that book really.
I bought it as a case when she came on to Breakfast with Champions before even really knowing the depths of her, other than her rap sheet of incredible pieces. And so I've gifted it and I've yet to read it, but I have books following me around everywhere I go. So I need to put it on the top, I guess.
But it's the kind of book that you can go, you do not pick it up on Saturday and end it Sunday. You do not. But it's a book that you will go through, tag things, go back to. It's just a great, almost textbook. It truly, truly is great.
Really neat. So tell me, like, because we're getting close on time, and I'm like, I feel like there's so many questions I have to ask you. Is knowing that you exited this one business, you knew you were about to jump into this next opportunity. I love how you shared with us how your faith exploration kind of evolved in that season as well. When that happened, were you in that relationship experience in Christianity where you felt like this was a God move or a God thing, or were you even unpacking him at that point in that context?
I truly believe, and believe is not the right word, I know that God allows things to happen in our lives so that we really learn and grow. And there's a component in that story that is very involved. I'm talking about selling it to the other company and so forth. But there was a challenge in there. And like you said, we're running out of time. But every decision from that moment on, I leaned on God. I trusted in God. Proverbs 3:5-6 has been for years and years and years my foundational scripture. Foundational. As a matter of fact,
Me too.
at the spa, that was the code for the back door.
That's mine. That was the first verse I ever memorized. And to this day, it's always the one I go back to.
Yes, it's so foundational. So basically, I started Novità, new birth, new life. That is what it means, an Italian word. And it was more appropriate also than hanging my hat on glycolic acid, because I knew that ingredients would evolve, and that's what happened. So Novità gave myself and my chemist, who I met at the original lab, and he had started his own business by this point. He's been with me forever. He's a fabulous pharmaceutical grade chemist. He's a wonderful, brilliant guy, and so a wonderful person as well. And so started Novità in 97, went back to the distributors. They said, oh, you did it before, you'll do it again. Come on, let's go. And so but then in the early 2000s, the distributors, which were privately owned, started selling their businesses to Alberto Culver, who owns the Sally stores, and L'Oreal, who owns meaning Redken. They started buying all the Redken houses, and I was in pretty much all of them around the United States. And so the structure of the industry was changing. It was just truly changing to much more of a big corporate structure. And so at that same time, my mother-in-law from my first marriage, who was a very dear friend, was in her latter stages of Alzheimer's. She needed help. Her husband needed help. And I said, you need help, buddy. And my daughter Jill had married and moved to from Fort Worth to Austin. And I knew this area was far better for them. And I changed my entire life to take care of Rose Fiorello, because she was so good to me, Tamra, so good to me. She was so good to my daughters. And I told her when I divorced her son that I would not leave her. I told her that. She said, I'm going to lose you too. I said, I promise you that won't happen. So when I make a promise, I try to keep it. And so I am an esthetician by license. I got my license in the early 90s up in Fort Worth. So I took a one-room studio in Georgetown, Texas, and didn't even live here, and took that studio and drove back and forth when I wasn't traveling, doing shows with distributors and the like. And so I saw that I did like it here. It was too much for my daughter to handle her go-go passing from that horrible disease. And so I came to Georgetown, Texas, and started the Novità Spa. Moved it up to the square, expanded it another step to about 4,000 square feet, and built it from a luxury day spa. That's why I call it the hybrid. So that in your notes. And that hybrid concept is a intellectual property that my collector says to me, Megan, that's the deal. I said, I know. Meaning it's combining luxury day spa with clinical, medical, and wellness, with the products tying it all together.
And so, people don't currently do that right now?
To the degree of this, because I mean, I've been to some medical spas that are not a doctor's office any longer, but it is, and the concept is expanding, it is, but not to the degree of really, as we discuss even this weekend, it's about that the client experience, as Steve Jobs so aptly put it. They don't really, they're still, sorry folks, physicians, they're still physicians, you know? And so that's the difference of it, and tying those products together with it. Last year, in the middle of the lockdown, Austin Women's Magazine, I was contacted. We were nominated for a finalist for the Austin Women's Way Awards. And in the product innovation category. And I said, what is the product, meaning the Novitop products? She said, no, you're hybrid, because I would market that. So it's a concept, right? We didn't win, but as Melinda Garvey said to me, Megan, do you realize how many, hundreds of people applied for this? And I didn't, someone applied for me.
I love that.
And so it was such an honor to really, I'm talking about timeliness, because during that lockdown, somebody knocked on my door and said, do you want to sell me your business? But I said, after communicating with this person, I didn't want to sell the trade name, the product line, the website, meaning the URL, which I'd had since '98, the shopping cart, because that's, as we now know, funnels, And so I said, no, but if you're interested in an asset purchase, yes, meaning the lease, goodwill, database, and so forth. And of course, expensive equipment. And so, and that happened June 1st, 2020, we closed. So it's been a journey. And, I'm working on many projects, as you know, and, but the book, and I will share this with you, a little piece. I did marry my second husband, never planning on ever getting married again. But I met Paul Tyler at church here in the Georgetown, Texas area. And I just knew in my spirit it was something I was supposed to do. And he had a stroke, though, in 2009. We married in 6, and threw him into a horrible situation. And I see God's hand in it very clearly, that he truly, before he fell apart, he got me, he affirmed me, and you understand this piece, you do. He understood me, he supported me, I don't mean financially, I'm talking about emotionally and from a career position. And God knew that he was going to need an advocate for this dreadful disease, Lewy body syndrome. So the night that he passed, that morning as this day was dawning, the backyard was full of white butterflies. And I'm like, I had been up for 2 days, and I'm like, well, am I hallucinating? I was like, what's going on here? And, but then I put my head on the kitchen table. I started praying, Father, give me, what are you telling me? I know there's something here. And I started raising my head, and I heard, share your story. And I had started working on, in 2019, a business course or program. And then I got this crushing thing in my spirit. You're not doing what I said. Stopped that, wrote that little book, published it, and it went to #1 on Amazon, January 4th, which is my mother's birthday.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
So, that's a short of a very long journey, but it is, the title of the book is Hope and Possibilities Just Over the Horizon. It's never too early or too late to create the life of your dreams. Ever.
You guys, there's so much to that. I feel like it could be almost like a documentary blended with your individual story as a movie. Because how cool would it be like to go back to New York City in that time frame and see the textiles and before all of that? Because every woman uses products. I mean, I've got products around me like everywhere, right? And to understand how it evolved, and even in my lifespan, half of the stuff didn't even exist, and I just can't even comprehend that. But more so, even in that, the faith journey that existed, it could be a beautiful. We're gonna have to make it a film. I don't know how. We should have asked that as a help statement at the conference.
And I know this in my spirit. I am so blown away that you picked that up. I'm just like because now I know that's affirming. We prayed before this, and I prayed the Jabez prayer as I was putting on my lipstick. And because I know that this should be a film, because it will help women. Exactly. I'm feeling the same way. And I mean, I see it in my mind, like you said about New York, and you were there last weekend, Can
I play the younger version of Megan in your movie? Because I think I could totally rock the Megan that you are.
I mean, with my mini dresses and my knee highs, and Mrs. Peppard taking me through the garment district. She, the one that I work for in Lord and Tiller, Megan, come on, let's go to Lily Pulitzer. Oh, Bonnie Cashin, who was the founder of Coach. It wasn't this big conglomerate. There was a Bonnie Cashin who did the turn. Yes, and she had these fabulous raincoats with those turn things. Yes.
Oh my gosh. It's like Devil Wears Prada meets beauty industry meets like the streets of even thinking about your parents, like coming over here. It's like, it's the American dream blended with like the vision of Christianity. And it's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful.
Thank you so much for just, meaning to have, we could talk this way regardless of, being on your podcast. But the thing is that what you and I both align to, and because this is your work, is to help people understand that God is in the middle of everything we do. We just have to let down our guard and let down our egos and allow the Holy Spirit to guide. To start. And that's why start, scale, and sustain. The piece of this is the sustaining piece. And I've said this to Sharon. I mean, it's, that people don't understand that. And you've shared your thoughts about this in this conversation, because they just want this immediate. And it is not that. It is, if you're going to really succeed in life, look at our friend Glenn Lundy. Holy crow. I mean, committed, but he knows he's in the beginning of his journey, and he's going to continue on. He's not going to stop.
Yeah. And we are blessed to be a part of that for sure. And I think it's incredible to see the people that he's bringing together, and you and I being two of those people in one way, shape, or form. But this has been such a gift, and I knew layers of it, but to see it all together in one, it really is magnificent. I've never, ever one time said out of my mouth on any podcast, 120 something episodes in, that this should be a movie. So the fact that I affirm that for you is kind of mind blowing to me. And again, you guys, this is like the listening, the active listening, and actually participating in conversation with people and allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to you, and then actually saying it rather than just processing it. I could hold that and just be like, oh, that would have been a cool movie. But this is when that next step, that Holy Spirit guidance of say this now, allows this experience to transform into something just magical. Megan, you're a gem, as I've always said. And truly, this was a special time. Thank you for sharing.
My true joy, blessing, and pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.